Amado Carrillo Fuentes
aseguran que
was
realmente...
Mexico's
Bueno, hoy
number
corrió el
one
rumor
cocaine
sobre la
trafficker
muerte del
until his death
narcotraficante
2 years
Amado
ago
Carrillo
following
Fuentes, mejor
botched
conocido
plastic
como el
surgery.
Señor de los Cielos.
Welcome back to Humans of History, where we break down the personalities of historic figures. If you haven't watched the bio on Amado Carrillo Fuentes, I recommend you check it out. It's quite a thorough introduction to the three-part series. But we all know why you're here. And I won't keep you waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, how did Amado Carrillo Fuentes die? Here's the official version announced by both Mexican and US officials after his death. Amado died from a mixture of anesthetic and the sleeping drug Dormicum. He was given too much of the sleeping drug and his heart, weakened by cocaine and alcohol, gave out. So what happened to the body? It's one hell of a story actually, a tragicomedy in its own right. So we're told Amado died in the early hours of Friday the 4th of July. The day after, on Saturday the 5th, his body was taken to a funeral parlor in Mexico City's Colonia Juárez. It was then flown to the San Martin Funeral Chapel in Culiacán, Sinaloa, to be buried by his relatives. But, under orders by the PGR, the Office of the Attorney General, the army confiscated the corpse. Why? Because the PGR suspected what many still suspect, that Amado was capable of faking his own death. So his body was flown back to Mexico City on Sunday the 6th. For nearly a week, forensic experts collected DNA samples from Amado's relatives to match them with blood samples from Amado's corpse. They also matched the corpse's fingerprints to two sets of prints. The first was from 1985, when Amado was stopped by US border police for carrying an automatic rifle into Mexico. The second was from 1989, when Amado was arrested in Mexico, convicted, and temporarily jailed thereafter. Both Mexican state and DEA officials matched the prints. DEA director Thomas Constantine even announced the news of Amado's death before the PGR did. After Amado's death was confirmed, the narco's body was returned to family members. They put him in a coffin and drove him to the airport, where a private plane was waiting to take them all to their hometown of Guamuchilito in Sinaloa for a Christian burial. What followed was completely absurd. The car driving Amado's body broke down on the highway. After his family had found a way to get them to the airport, the coffin didn't fit inside the plane. Amado's body had to be placed inside a black plastic bag. Worthy of a Greek tragedy, after the plane departed, we're told Aurora, Amado's mother, took her dead son out of the bag and carried him herself for the rest of the journey. So now we know the basic events of Amado's death, let's get into the nitty-gritty. The big question is, was his death an accident? The first thing to know is administering excessive quantities of Dormicum into a patient with poor health like Amado's was a feat of gross negligence. 3 surgeons at least operated on Amado, so it seems unlikely all 3 would have consented to it, at least not without an ulterior motive. If it was done accidentally, it's more likely it was a lone decision. You can certainly paint the scene. Amado in a hospital bed, lying in agony after a grueling operation, begging a doctor in the early hours of the morning to soothe his pain. Now, this was a man as dangerous as he was powerful, who could have you and your family killed with just one text message. You'd have to be either a fool or a doctor of great seriousness to deny him what he wants. But then, there's reason to believe the surgeons were meant to assassinate him. When Amado's body was found, the sutures used to stitch up the surgical cuts were still open. A plastic surgeon, or at least a good one, is paid not to leave any scars. The whole idea is to change your appearance. It seems odd to think that the personal surgeons of what was probably the world's wealthiest man could make such a rookie mistake. Mexican officials themselves even accused the surgeons of foul play. 3 months after Amado's death, Mariano Herrán Sarvati, head of Mexico's anti-drug agency, told the press that officials believe the surgeons act, quote, with malice and with the intention of taking his life. The physicians were charged with murder for administering drugs which, quote, contradicted all medical sense. So if the surgeons were acting on somebody's behalf, whose payroll were they on? Salvati claimed the assassination was ordered from members within the Juárez organization. His take was that Amado had gotten sloppier in covering his tracks. He'd been spending more time with girlfriends, visiting fancy restaurants, basically opening himself up to photographs and destroying the anonymity he had once been so adept at sustaining. In other words, cartel affiliates considered him a sitting duck to law enforcement or rivals, thereby endangering their operation. Another hypothesis is handed down to us by journalist Rafael Núñez, who worked in the Juárez El Paso area in the 1990s. His story begins in 1995. You might recall the name Alberto Ochoa Soto, the Colombian money broker and trafficker I mentioned in the first video. He was said to be the first major Colombian connection for Amado during his apprenticeship under Pablo Acosta in Ojinaga, Chihuahua. Alberto was a big fish in the Medellin cartel and an expert when it came to the logistical details of smuggling cocaine. He taught Amado all the angles and roles in the supply chain, from the South American labs all the way up to the US drug routes. In 1994, Alberto was arrested by the DEA for conspiracy to smuggle a 6-ton shipment into the US. Despite incriminating evidence, US authorities released him from custody on the 11th of February 1995, and he was expelled from the country. Against the advice of his Colombian lawyers, Ochoa Soto decided not to return to his South American home country. Instead, he chose to cross the border into Mexico and join his second wife, a native Mexican. Ochoa's Mexican lawyer, Antonio Tarazon Navarro, had worked as a Mexican federal attorney for years and was well connected to Mexico's political and military elite. When he told Alberto he would be safe, he went ahead and took his word for it. His plan was to return to Ciudad Juárez, where he had 22 tons of cocaine ready for distribution with his friend and business partner, Amado. On the 11th of February 1995, around 11 a.m., Alberto walked across the Paso del Norte bridge over into Mexico. There, he met with Mexican lawyer Tarazon Navarro underneath the Mexican and US flags. Alberto took no more than 20 steps into Mexico. Suddenly, Alberto and his lawyer were intercepted by a group of Mexican federal police carrying machine guns and pistols. Alberto and Navarro were forced into a vehicle at gunpoint, the traffic lanes were cleared, and the blue Chevrolet Suburban sped down the road towards Mexico. What happened next is a mystery. Nearly 5 years later, Alberto's body was unearthed in a narco grave in Juárez. In May 2000, the New York Times also reported that the body of Navarro had been identified 1 week earlier. Navarro had gunshots to the neck and face. He was wearing the clothes he had been wearing on the day of his abduction. It's not clear when the remains of Alberto had been identified, but his body was still in a Juárez morgue when the journalist went to visit in the mid-2000s. So, who ordered the hit? Well, remember those 22 tons of cocaine in Juárez that Alberto was keen to get his hands on? That was worth an estimated $3 billion. Guess who also might have been interested in it? Especially, guess who might have wanted to keep all of it for himself? When news of Alberto's not guilty verdict came in from the US court and he was released, it was to everyone's surprise. The DEA certainly couldn't believe it. After all, they had produced the incriminating wiretap of Ochoa Soto conspiring to smuggle 6 tons of cocaine into Texas. But it was perhaps Amado who was even more hopeful for the Colombians' incarceration. Not only did the Juárez boss want to keep the coke for himself, according to DEA officials, Amado wanted to punish Alberto for moving huge quantities of cocaine through Juárez without clearing it with him first. As one official once said about the Lord of the Skies, quote, "He doesn't let anyone smuggle a gram that isn't his." Such was his tyrannical grip over Juárez. So, with high-ranking members of the Mexican Federal Police on his payroll, Amado ordered the hit on Alberto. On the same day, he set foot back into Mexico. Now, Alberto was uncle to the Ochoa brothers, high-ranking capos in the Medellin cartel. According to Núñez, Amado told the Ochoa brothers he had nothing to do with their uncle's murder. Fabio Ochoa Vázquez, the youngest of the 3 brothers and the alleged leader of the Medellin cartel after the death of Pablo Escobar, replied with a conciliatory word. The Colombians told Amado they were going to let bygones be bygones. They'd give Amado the benefit of the doubt, not seek revenge and resume business as usual. Sources close to the Ochoa family, however, begged to differ. They later revealed that the Ochoa brothers were in fact furious. But they couldn't go to war. The Medellin cartel was practically crippled after the death of Pablo Escobar in late 1993. The Ochoa brothers couldn't jeopardize the tenuous hold they had over the fragmented cartel. As they bided their time, they kept Amado as a necessary business partner. And one day, when Amado was, say, at his most vulnerable, they would exact revenge. Flash forward 3 years later to July of 1997, Amado was dead, and his corpse had been returned to his Sinaloan hometown of Guamacholito, where his family had arranged an open casket funeral attended by over 1,000 local townspeople, as well as cartel members, all paying their respects. Hundreds of bouquets and floral wreaths adorned the family home. According to one of the local villagers, when the funeral was over and the guests had left, several of the villagers had stayed behind to help family members take down the decorations. While one of the villagers was sorting through the flowers, among the many white roses and bright polychrome blooms was a wreath made up entirely of black roses. When the villager found the accompanying card, they read not the usual words of condolence or comforting religious sentiment, but the following message: "All good things come to those that know how to wait." Written near the end of the card, before an indecipherable signature, was, quote, "Greetings from the Ochoa family in Colombia." So there you have it. That's another version. Add to that the fact that two of the surgeons who operated on Amado were Colombians, and you could make the case for a revenge story. But the mystery, ladies and gentlemen, of Amado's death doesn't end there. Some have asked questions about Amado's corpse. Anabel Hernandez, journalist well known for her work on the Mexican cartels and the war on drugs, cast some doubt on the official narrative, fanning conspiracies further. She claims several informants who were contacted in the investigation, employees of Amado's who knew him well, said Amado had two unmistakable marks: a dark, hairy mole on his back and a prominent scar on one buttock. The corpse in Santa Monica didn't have either. That said, we should perhaps be questioning the likelihood of an employee ever catching a glimpse of Amado Carrillo's rear end, or the information being divulged by the capo himself. Others have said this: if Amado was admitted to hospital for plastic surgery on his face, why wasn't his moustache shaved? This is meant to be standard practice for surgeons, and if we're to believe the official narrative, he was in for radical plastic surgery, much of which was on his jawline, eyes and nose. Is this unprofessional negligence once again, or something else? Several nurses and other members of staff present at the hospital told authorities that a, quote, unknown doctor walked in and out of the operation room several times before disappearing. Andres Lopez Lopez, a former Colombian drug trafficker turned author and journalist, stated a DEA official said a, quote, tall, fair-skinned North American went against official orders not to give Amado any more drugs. The counter-logical facts of Amado's corpse and the evidence for shady activity during the operation brought many to one conclusion. Amado didn't die on the operating table. He wasn't even assassinated. Amado faked his own death. The theory is that heat from officials on both sides of the border, as well as from his enemies, could have forced Mexico's most powerful drug trafficker to check out. No jail time, no bounty hunts, just a clean, forensic exit from the trade, under the guise of death, masterminded by one of Mexico's most elusive drug lords. One of the earliest claims was that Amado had faked his own death to act as the DEA's star informant in the regional war on drugs. The claim was quickly dismissed by the DEA as a, quote, rumor with as much credibility as the millions of sightings of the late Elvis Presley. Their answer would be the official version, that the corpse's fingerprints matched those from 1985 and 1989, which was irrefutable evidence that the corpse was Amado's. It's also worth hearing the account of Edward Follis, a DEA agent who'd been on Amado's tail for years and wrote The Dark Art, My Undercover Work in Global Narco-Terrorism. He writes how he was in Texas at the time of Amado's death and wrote this: "We knew we couldn't trust any of the information we were getting out of Mexico. We had to be certain that the Lord of the Skies had not cleverly staged his own death." Follis and his partner crossed the border into Mexico, quote, immediately after Independence Day weekend, presumably Monday the 7th. Follis states, "I had to match his fingerprints to an existing print we had. We had one on file because Amado had once applied for a visa to enter the United States. And the prints were a match. James Milford, Deputy Administrator of the DEA, received conclusive proof at 7 p.m. on Monday night, presumably follows his work. The fingerprints taken from the corpse matched those on a US border crossing card issued to Amado in 1985 by the US Immigration and Naturalization Service. It was this card that gave him temporary access into the US whenever he liked. Referring to the prints taken of Amado in 1985, one DEA official told the press, quote, "I didn't say it was Amado. What I said was that the fingerprints that were taken from a young man who resembles the Amado that we all know and was fingerprinted as an illegal alien 20 years ago is the same person as this corpse. Whether it's Amado or not, that's a different matter. But it would have had to have been some type of conspiracy over 20 years that some guy was going to die and they were going to substitute the body of the guy who was in Presidio, Texas 20 years ago." So if the DEA really did collaborate with Amado, it would have involved several agents in on a highly confidential plot, or at least several agents that were deceived by their superiors. In any case, you have to wonder how credible this is. Despite this, many believe Amado is still alive. He's been sighted in Cuba, Chile, even as far out as Germany. To borrow the DEA's line again though, these could have as much truth as the sightings of Elvis Presley. Also, even after the Mexican government had announced Amado's death, the Chilean government was skeptical of the results and kept their own investigations going. Amado had, after all, spent many weeks in the Andean nation in the year of his death, scouting for business opportunities and spending lavishly, both for business and leisure. He could have just as easily been scouting for ways to escape his old life. Others who cast doubt on the death of Amado Carrillo Fuentes include Francisco Barrio Terrazas, then governor of the state of Chihuahua. Journalists Anabel Hernandez and Sergio González Rodriguez question whether Amado really died. Another notable skeptic was Amado's one-time lawyer, José Alfredo Andrade Bojorges, who went missing in 1999 after publishing his findings on the Juárez cartel. It was a sort of exposé on the who's who of the organization, with names of state officials and departments with links to the cartel. His abduction and likely death fanned conspiracies that he was a purged witness killed on the orders of Amado alive. That said though, Andrade, with his groundbreaking publication, made a lot of enemies on both sides of the law. José María Yaspic, the actor who played Amado in the Netflix series Narcos, apparently told The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "I truly believe that Amado got away with it." While researching the role, Yaspic met officials from the army as well as special forces involved in the case, who shared several stories he wasn't allowed to reveal. Narcos is one of the most popular shows on TV today, fairly well known for its depth of research, as well as the experts it recruits to ensure historical accuracy. Just food for thought. Perhaps the most interesting information is handed down to us by Jesus Lemus Barajas. Lemus was a journalist falsely convicted of leading a drug cartel, the Michoacan family. During his 3 years in jail at the Puente Grande prison in the state of Jalisco, before he secured his release by proving his innocence, he racked up all sorts of stories from interviews and conversations with drug traffickers and top bosses in organized crime. One of his fellow inmates was a man called Ramon Miranda, who claimed to be a money broker and personal treasurer to Amado Carrillo. He was often in charge of his family's accounts. Miranda had several insights and revelations on the Lord of the Skies, the majority of these square with official events as told by reporters, law enforcers, and state officials. He was convinced that Amado faked his own death to avoid a prison cell. He believed he had become an informant to the DEA and the FBI so that he could collaborate on taking down other Mexican drug traffickers. Miranda retold what's already known about the increased pressure on Amado in the months before his death. A prison cell for Amado was out of the question. He'd been tortured and beaten during his incarceration in 1989. Amado was certain that if he ended up behind bars, he'd be assassinated. According to Miranda, a Latino FBI agent, last name Martinez, met regularly with Amado in Chihuahua. He was the one who gave him the idea to fake his death, or so Miranda claimed. In the lead up to July 1997, Miranda recalls being tasked with securing unusually large payments in cash. as well as odd, confidential meetings between an increasingly nervous Amado and some of his closest advisors. At some point in May or June, at Amado's office, Miranda met face-to-face with a doctor called Ricardo Reyes Rincon, a man he'd met before. He then connected the dots. Miranda assumed that the $5 million in cash was for another round of plastic surgery to alter his appearance. The capture and arrest of drug czar Gutierrez Rebollo in February 1997 meant Amado's protection network was severely compromised. Worse still, Tomás Colsa McGregor, a luxury jeweler and top money launderer for the Juárez cartel, became a protected witness under the PGR. McGregor's collaboration resulted in 12 new inquiries against Amado, on top of the 16 open inquiries in the US. On the 3rd of July, Amado was taken into the Santa Monica clinic under the name of Antonio Flores Montes. He was admitted by the same doctor, Ricardo Reyes Rincon, to room 407. Because 7 was his lucky number. Miranda claimed the official medical document stated Amado was in for liposuction and work on his cheekbones. All members of Amado's inner circle, including his family, believed it was simply another one of Amado's operation. Miranda stated that before entering the hospital, Amado had to make several emergency payments early that day, an estimated $5 billion according to Miranda, chiefly to the accounts of his brothers, sisters, and his mother. According to Miranda, he heard that Amado left the hospital 3 hours after he was admitted. Miranda was told by someone he could not name that Amado was picked up by 5 men wearing suits who may have been Americans and not cartel members. The hospital staff didn't question Amado when he demanded to be released from medical care. He left the hospital with the men, they got into a black van, and they drove off. Now, let's say for the sake of argument, this story was true. If this actually happened, Amado would have left the corpse of a lookalike. He would have crafted the story of intensive plastic surgery as an excuse for a drug overdose. Any slight differences between Amado and the lookalike could be explained away by Amado's recent plastic surgery. It would have been a stroke of genius, basically. Miranda himself didn't think the corpse looked much like Amado. By his account, the body shown in press reports was already in an advanced state of decomposition, far beyond what a corpse would normally look like under a week after death, especially if it was kept for forensic analysis. The body would have been refrigerated or otherwise preserved to hold off decomposition for as long as possible. That said, evidence of the discoloration of the skin and livor mortis does suggest that the corpse's appearance is compatible with the stage of decomposition 1 week after death. How are we doing? Come on, it's just a bit of death. I'm risking demonetization for this, so take it all in. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, so let's suppose we took Miranda's testimony at face value. The body that was found at the clinic, whose was it? According to Miranda, it could have been a double. He stated that in the 2 years before his alleged death, Amado was searching for a double as part of his security strategy. Apparently, one of his escorts found a lookalike in the form of a police agent from the local federal district called José Luis Rodríguez, alias El Chiquilín. Curiously, Mexican magazine Reforma had a different name for El Chiquilín, Jorge Francisco Palacio Hernández. The commander was called on frequently around Juárez, but in the months before Amado's supposed death, El Chiquilín disappeared, and nobody knew anything more about it. In fact, David Vicenteño, a reporter from the newspaper Reforma, and who had been working on the disappearance of El Chiquilín, was allegedly kidnapped, beaten, and threatened not to investigate anymore. Miranda went on to say that the DEA were the first to arrive on the scene to check the corpse, without anyone knowing that Amado had died. They checked his prints, and then told the press that the body was indeed Amado Carrillo's, and that the PGR simply retold what the DEA said. So, what are we to believe? There are plenty of reasons not to take Miranda's testimony at face value. One is obviously the boldness of the claim, having the DEA cooperate with a criminal on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list after tailing him for over half a decade. And again, it's a big secret for lots of DEA agents to take to the grave. There also appears to be photographic evidence of the matches released to the press. Not something people with something to hide would do, unless of course those prints had been tampered with. A statement like Miranda's is a very convenient narrative for those who insist that Amado faked his death. If Miranda's fundamental claim is that Amado staged his death and became an informant of the DEA, then no amount of statements, without evidence at least, from the DEA or US intelligence can truly undermine it. And there are plenty of historical precedents of shady involvement in Latin America where US secret services have breached the seemingly impossible. One need only look at Chile in 1973, Operation Condor in South America throughout the 70s and 80s, the Iran-Contra scandal under Reagan, or more relevantly, the testimony of retired DEA agent Héctor Berreyes on the torture and murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena Salazar, implicating the CIA. But bear in mind, Miranda could have been repeating unfounded hearsay, another product of the rumor mill created after Amado's operation. Part of him could also be in denial over the death of his old boss. He clearly admired him. Or perhaps he didn't know all the details of the case from the American side. He was in jail, after all. Maybe one day we'll find out what truly happened in that hospital. 3 of the surgeons who supposedly operated on Amado were brutally tortured and murdered. Their unholy remains were found several months after the operation in 66-gallon oil drums on a highway between Mexico City and Acapulco. Many commentators have seen this as a purge of witnesses by Amado. Miranda himself, though, confesses this was the handiwork of Vicente Carrillo, Amado's brother and successor, who sought revenge for what he believed was his brother's assassination. This is also what DEA officials suspected. So, small recap. The operation bears signs of foul play. Amado's moustache, the fact the sutures weren't closed, testimonies from hospital staff. Amado had many enemies, and murder by lethal injection remains possible. Involuntary slaughter shouldn't be ruled out either. We simply don't know what happened in that clinic. The fact that Amado could have faked his death, given his political power and wealth, fires the imagination. But the rumor appears to fall flat given the number of DEA representatives who announced matches between the body's fingerprints and those of Amado while he was alive. There could be more we don't know, but for now, in the absence of clear evidence that challenges the forensic findings, we should take their word for it. Leave your comments down below. I expect to read some spirited debate. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Do it now. And stay tuned for the grand finale where we take a look at the man behind the shadows. Who was Amado Carrillo Fuentes really?